So I've been interested in the Roland VT-4 for a while now. The good folks at Zounds were kind enough to send one over for me to check out. I'm borrowing it for a little bit, and I'm probably going to send it back soon, just because it's not a permanent loan. But it is a device I've been really interested in because when I'm thinking about building a live setup, one of the biggest pain points, if I don't want to use a computer, is finding a way to both have pitch correction, which this can do, live effects such as reverb, vocoder, and harmony, which this can do, and have all of that in a separate piece of hardware, because one of the biggest limitations of most of the hardware that I use, and a lot of the hardware I'm considering using for live performance, is that a lot of them have limitations on how many plugins or how much sound you can have, how much memory you can use per project. And so if I were to say use the built-in voice tools, which are really good on something like the Akai Force or the MPCs, even though they're really high quality, every time I change my project, I would have to have a moment where there'd be no audio coming from my system. And if that was my primary input for vocals, then I could imagine a scenario in a show where I'm like, okay, that song's over, hold up. Okay, and I'm back. And it's not the end of the world, and I think people would get it, and maybe you just have two microphones or something. And I'll admit I haven't done a lot of live performance, so maybe I'm overthinking this. But I liked the idea of the Roland VT-4 because it bypasses all of that. If you had a mixer and the Roland VT-4 was plugged into its own inputs and your other devices were plugged into their own inputs, then you could hypothetically have like a Machine Plus and an MPC or an Akai Force or whatever you want, the Polyan Tracker, something else, the OP1, and have your vocals be totally separate. And for the most part, I think this can actually do that pretty well. There are a few things I'm worried about. So one thing that's cool is you choose the key for when you're doing pitch correction. So let's turn auto pitch all the way up, turn the effect all the way up. So the thing you might see there is that if songs are in different keys, I'm going to have to know what key the song's in, which I'm not, as much as I've been doing music production forever, I don't usually think in that way. Although most of these devices will tell you what key your project is in, or you can at least like find what your root note is. And that'll just be some work I have to do. So that's the first obvious roadblock I see, is like if your song changes key, you'd have to know that if you need pitch correction and then change that appropriately per song. But I think that's still in some ways better than waiting for a project to load. Although on the flip side, if you were to use something like the Akai Force, you could just have your mic plugged directly in, similar to the VT-4, and you could have your specific pitch correction settings per project. Alternatively, some people might say, well, why don't you just bake your audio down into small enough loops and use few enough plugins that you have your entire live set in one project? I think it's a cool idea, and it is maybe what I'll end up doing. And all of this assumes I don't just get a laptop again and use a laptop for live performance. I will be the first to admit I overthink almost everything, and this is definitely one of those things I'm overthinking. But that is the big why for why I would want the Roland VT-4 in 2023, is because you have access to just so many things you can do, and you can change all kinds of stuff, which is pretty cool. And I think if you have enough automation in your set, it could be really cool while you're singing to also be implementing some of this stuff. So now I have a harmony. Now I know. And I could switch into megaphone. You know what I mean? So if you felt comfortable enough in your set and you had everything else down, you can then also start doing dynamic stuff with your voice. Now, a lot of the guidance I've seen from other performers and the people I've talked to is try to simplify as much as possible, because in the heat of the moment, you're probably going to be feeling a lot of emotion, potentially a lot of stress. And so you don't want to have to overthink stuff. I think having a little bit of manual control can also add some excitement to what might otherwise seem like a pre-programmed set, which is true across the board for a lot of the hardware. You can map to cue links on the MPCs and the Akai Force, and you can use different parameter macros on the Machine Plus, for example. Yeah, that to me is this is why I wanted to try it. It was really, can I get auto-tune in a box? And the answer is yes. And you can control the amount of pitch. So, Let's find a key I like. You can introduce reverb. So that's something I don't love. Is that, I guess I could just use the bypass button. But yeah, something I am not a huge fan of compared to software auto-tune is that, especially something like Waves Tune real time, you can choose individual notes per instance of Waves Tune that you actually want to be included in the scale. I often find that the default scale, like of a pitch correction, isn't always going to include every note I might want to hit. And I don't know how to do that with this. It might be possible, but so far I haven't figured that out. I do think it has like subscales and stuff like that, but I don't know if it goes as deep as like major, minor, that sort of thing. If you know, feel free to comment below. I know it also has multi-modes for some of these different effects, and I haven't dived too deep into that. I'm kind of trying to decide would I want to keep it and build out some kind of live set. And truthfully, I think I'm still far enough away from doing real in-person live sets that it's just not something I really need right now. But I have used it for recording. I made a video where I was just doing a bunch of different layering of vocal effects into the Akai Force. I've also done some of that with other devices as well. I think it's a really cool way to get audio into a groove box that maybe doesn't have, without having to use something like a compressor or one of your effect slots, because you have so much volume control here, and that lets you kind of boost the signal before it even hits whatever device you're using, which is cool. One thing I wish this had, and please correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't have this, is some kind of EQ built in. Because if I'm here with my mic, you can hear there's a lot of bass, a lot of deep end. If I'm over here, it's not too bad, and maybe it's just about, keeping proper distance from the microphone. But often when I'm doing vocal recording, I will just make sure to add an EQ after my vocals to take a lot of the bottom end out, because this can give you the impression I have a really deep, sultry voice. But the truth is, that's just what happens when you're really close to a microphone. So yeah, overall, I think this is really cool. Turn bypass off. And I think it's a really neat tool. And I think there's a lot you can do with it. I haven't actually messed with the vocoder too much. It'd be cool to plug in some sort of device and actually play keys with it. I have at least one song on my next album that was mostly composed using Autotune and a vocoder plugin, and it'd be cool to be able to replicate that live. So this is something I could potentially do that with too, because you can layer so much stuff. Let's see, let's try some of these other things. So right now we have pitch correction and reverb. Try robot. Don't you know, don't you know, don't you know? Oh, don't you know, don't you know, don't you know? One of the other things you have is pitch, so I can take it an octave up or down. I don't have to be that low to hit the note, and that's what you hear. And there's this midpoint you can feel when you're using the slider, so it's really easy to not be like out of pitch or mess with your formant. And this is what that formant sounds like.
So you can get your voice to basically sound like you have a much deeper formant.
Or higher formant, which is why this is a voice transformer.
And not just a pitch corrector. And so, don't you know, I don't wanna fall. And there's just so much stuff you can do with this that is normally done with software, and the software has a lot more power, right? So that's one of the benefits of the software, is that you have more granular control. But similar to a lot of hardware, where it might lack some of the raw power of a computer, it makes up in just like being so tactile and having so much all in one with the sliders and the formants and the pitch. I don't know. I think it's pretty easy to see why I was excited about this and why someone might be excited about it. But you do basically have to be a vocalist, I think, for this to even matter, or have a vocalist working with you who wants to use it for it to even be interesting. I'm sure you could do some cool stuff with this, routing a guitar or some other instrument into it. So, don't just limit yourself, but I do think the big draw here is for vocalists. The VT-4 is currently retailing for $250. And yeah, if I were to buy it from Zounds, I believe that's how much I would pay. It is a little expensive, but I don't think there's anything else really like it on the market. That said, Roland has created, I think, like a little Ira Mini thing. Let's see. They made like a little guy. Yeah. It was the Ira Compact E4. And this is something you could also get, which does voice stuff for $50 less. I haven't used this, and I kind of forgot they did this. I think it has a looper too. I don't think it has quite the same amount of raw options and effects though. It was part of their series of smaller devices along with the T8 Beat Machine, and I think they did like a little Juno as well. And I think that's cool, but I would still probably lean towards the VT-4 if you wanted a raw effects box for your voice. Please comment below if you know of any other good live vocal effects, like boxes, standalone devices that I should check out, because I'd be happy to look into more of this stuff. And thank you again to Zounds for letting me borrow this and letting me make some videos with it. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing or joining my Patreon like these amazing folks. Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons, to everyone who's liked and subscribed to any of my videos, because we're almost at 8,000 subscribers. This channel keeps growing, and it only grows because people like you are watching and caring about what I do. So thank you so much for your time. I hope this was informative. If you have any other questions about this, please put them in the comments and I'll answer them if I can. All right. Have a great day. Have a great week. I'll see you soon.